So a lot of people ask me about what are the best ways to defend, the Pahlavi brand as a whole. There are so many lies by leftists and Islamists all around the world regarding Pahlavi. And how could we how do we fight back against it? So I thought it would be a really good resource for us to have if I write an article addressing every single attacks on all the three Pahlavis and respond to them. So I just wanted to go through what are the main anti-Pahlavi talking points are with you guys, and maybe if you guys remember anything that I don't have this on this list, and maybe even quickly respond to each one of them, a short version of it, and then maybe you guys could give me some feedback regarding if this is a good list or not. Okay, so when it comes to Pahlavi in Iran, we have the three Pahlavis: Reza Shah or Reza Pahlavi, Muhammad Reza Shah or Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, and Prince Reza Pahlavi, the third Pahlavi, the living Pahlavi, right? So Reza Shah was the first Pahlavi king, Muhammad Reza Shah was the second Pahlavi king, and Prince Reza Pahlavi is probably going to become the third Pahlavi king, right? So for Reza Shah, the things that they say against him is that he was an ally of the Nazis. They say that he forcefully removed hijab from women, and also that he suppressed and he was brutal against the Kurds, right? So for the Nazis, Shah during Reza Shah was actually very friendly to Jews, and even when during World War II, Reza Shah basically mentioned his neutrality because Iran was after the fall of the Qajar dynasty. Reza Shah's main goal for Iran was to introduce stability to Iran because we were at the brink of complete collapse. Like Iran was, but if the Reza Shah didn't came to save Iran, Iran wouldn't even exist as a country right now. So in the middle of World War II, like given that he saved us from the brink of collapse, getting involved in World War II was the number one thing that Reza Shah was trying to avoid, right? And even though he claimed neutrality, what the Allies tried to do is that they tried to come inside Iran and take and use Iran for their war, even though Iran was trying to completely stay out of it. And what Reza Shah did was that he allowed the Germans to come and be inside Iran just to basically have both sides be inside Iran. So basically, it was just like factories, like he was working with like the British and the Americans, and the Germans were also included. It wasn't that he was basically taking the side of the Nazis. He was just trying to maintain a complete neutrality in the middle of World War II. That was what his priority was. Not he was just trying to be completely neutral. But the interesting thing is that he did make it clear that hands off the Jews in Iran. So that's not something that person with pro-Nazi ideology would be advocating for. And again, it's very interesting where people say that because when like obviously survival is the highest priority for every country, and expecting Reza Shah to take a more anti-Nazi Germany approach while his own country needed more stability in the middle of World War II is, I think, insanity, right? With regards to hijab, that's a lie by the Islamic Republic. He did enforce certain outfits for both men and women in certain places. There was no like people were still wearing chador and hijab. He did, I think, ban the face covering, which makes sense. But during Reza Shah times, many Iranian women hijab was still common. Many places, women were wearing not just the hijab but also the chador. With regards to the Kurds, Reza Shah was not anti-Kurdish. He was not suppressing the Kurds. In fact, if anything, he saved the Kurds because he was suppressing the separatist groups, not the Kurds. And if the separatist groups were successful, the Kurdish area of Iran would enter into an multiple decades era of chaos, which would have caused many Kurds of Iran to be slaughtered by different elements of Kurdish separatist groups fighting against each other. So actually, Muhammad Reza Shah saved the Kurds. He wasn't suppressing the Kurds. He saved them from the separatists being able to take over. So for Muhammad Reza Shah, so this is the first Pahlavi. Now let's move on to the second Pahlavi, Muhammad Reza Shah. So, by the way, if I miss any main criticism against Reza Shah, let me know because I want to make sure my list is complete. So the main things that they say against Muhammad Reza Shah is that the
I mean, I
Mossadegh
wrote one in
thing.
the chat. Why you call his son Muhammad?
y-
But that's just a
Like,
joke.
yeah, let me guys, let me finish this. You could tell me after I'm done, okay? Yeah, let me know after I'm done, okay? But because I lose my train of thought. So the first one for Muhammad Reza Shah is Mossadegh, saying that he did a coup against Mossadegh, that Mossadegh was the elected choice of the Iranian people, and the CIA came in and put Mohammad Reza Shah as a tyrant on the Iranian people against the wishes of the Iranian people because they elected Mossadegh. And this was a CIA coup against the democratically elected prime minister of the Iranian people, right? So that's a bunch of BS because, first of all, it's not a coup for two reasons. Because a coup d'etat, first of all, has to be illegal under the constitution of Iran back during Muhammad Reza Shah's time. The Shah had the ability, they had the legal authority to remove the prime minister. So it wasn't illegal. It was allowed based on the constitution. And also, a coup d'etat happens from the bottom up. It's like somebody lower remove somebody higher. So based on the Iran's constitution, the Shah was above Mossadegh based on the position that he had. So that can't be a coup d'etat. In fact, it was Mossadegh who was doing a coup d'etat against the Shah because what he was doing was illegal. And he was in no position to annul the parliament, and he had no legal authority to even have a referendum to do such a thing anyways. And he also resisted the Shah's command to step down as prime minister, which was illegal according to constitution. And also because he was trying to remove the power of the Shah who was above him, Mossadegh was the one who was doing the coup d'etat. We have a lot of evidence that shows that the CIA, the only agents that the CIA had in Iran were a couple of few people with a typewriter, that all they were doing was reporting back to Washington. And when Mossadegh's coup d'etat was happening, they were actually thinking like, okay, this is it. So they were getting ready. They were basically giving reports to Washington D.C. that Mossadegh has won. So this is the new ruler. Like we have to go with him. But then when everything turned against Mossadegh, and the Shah supporters came into the streets and everything turned in favor of Mohammad Reza Shah, we actually have messages from the CIA agents back to Washington them showing that they were surprised by this turn. Like they expressed shock, like, oh my god, okay, everything turned changed in favor of Mohammad Reza Shah last minute. So this couldn't have been a CIA operation, given that they were surprised by what happened. This was the Iranian people bringing back the Shah, and so this was not a CIA. The Shah was not handpicked by the CIA. I mean, he was that's insanity to even suggest because the Shah was there to begin with. Mossadegh tried to remove him; it didn't work. Like how is that described as handpicked by the Americans? It makes absolutely no sense, right? So there's that. And by the way, the referendum that Mossadegh has never been elected directly, was never elected directly by the people. He was actually picked by Mohammad Reza Shah to be the prime minister. The prime ministers were not directly elected by the people, so that's a lie. And also, the illegal referendum that Mossadegh put in place for him to remove the parliament, to get basically end the parliament. That referendum was also not just illegal, but it was the way that he engineered it was completely insane because what he did is he put the yes vote instead of having ballot boxes where you could vote yes or no. He made the yes people go to certain ballot boxes and then no people to go to other ballot boxes, so that this way whoever was voting no could have been identified. And he was very dictatorial because the way that Mossadegh would send his followers to attack, to physically attack and silence any paper, even newspaper against Mossadegh will be shut down, and people who resisted Mossadegh He would suppress that. He had his goons who would do he had his basically his followers that would go attack the people who were anti-Mossadegh. And so a lot of people in that environment, the fact that if you could be identified that you're voting no, that would be very intimidating. So many people didn't part wouldn't people would who did want to vote no wouldn't go and vote no. And also there was a very small percentage of the total population of that could vote in Iran actually participated in those elections. So that was an illegal referendum, and it was not even his rights, and it wasn't a coup. It was a failed coup d'état by Mossadegh. Remember, we had lords and serfdom when Muhammad Reza Shah came into power. We basically had feudalism. He ended feudalism. The idea that we have to go from feudalism to complete liberal democracy in one life, in one generation, in just a few years is insanity. Basically, the people who are saying, why didn't we have complete democratic freedoms in Iran during Muhammad Reza Shah's time? They were asking Muhammad Reza Shah to go through what Europe had spent more like 1,000 years of European history. They wanted to go through all of that in like I don't know 10 years, which is insanity. He just ended feudalism for you. He just ended serfdom for you. And when it comes to democratic like metrics of how democratic a country is, instead of judging Muhammad Reza Shah on how democratic Iran was at the time, what you have to look at is the trend, because the trend was in the right direction and Iran was becoming more and more democratic. So you have to see where you started and where you are right now, rather than comparing how Iran was at his time compared to many European countries. But even if you do want to compare Iran to some European countries, Iran gave women the right to vote ahead of many European countries, ahead of Switzerland, for example. So in many ways, we were ahead of European countries on democratic metrics. But even though we weren't completely free democratic, like we weren't like as good as many countries, including, for example, the United States, when it comes to democratic metrics, the truth is that Muhammad Reza Shah was obsessed with getting us there, and he was trying his best to, like, every time he loosened things up and allowed like complete democratic freedom, what he witnessed is that the commies, the Soviet Union through the commies was trying to use the democratic process to take control and basically make certain parts of, like, basically grab certain parts of Iran for the Soviet Union. So when he every time he experienced that, he had to basically make things a little bit more restrictive because of the how big the communist threat was. There's, for example, a famous thing that happened between Mohammad Reza Shah and SAVAK at that time, where Mohammad Reza Shah asked SAVAK to go do a report to see what will happen if we completely basically make everything completely free for all the parties and make it completely democratic. And Savak came with a report that, yeah, the commies are going to win, and basically the Soviets are going to be able to take parts of huge parts of Iran. And Muhammad Reza Shah was very angry with Savak. Like, what is this report? You guys are trying to make me into a dictator. Like, he hated that. But Buck was like, this is just a report. Like, what do you want us to do? And for example, Muhammad Reza Shah would usually argue with Savak. Like, he was on the phone with them. He would try to get certain political prisoners free, and they would basically Savak on the other line would respond to him. They would say, Your Highness, you don't have authority. They would Savak would tell the king that you don't have the authority to free these political prisoners. Like, these are terrorists, right? But the Shah was obsessed with freeing people and forgiving people. Like, he famously forgave the person who shot him, his would-be assassin. He forgave him. And if you actually go look at a lot of documentaries of the prisons at that time, you could see that how good their conditions were and how easily they would get freed. Like, people who were terrorists would get freed like in 2 or 3 years, even though they were trying to kill different politicians. I should actually put clips to this documentary that I have, where you could see that how many lies against the conditions of the prisoners were common at that time. And when there were investigative journalists visiting the prisons, they could see that the prison conditions were so much better than what the leftists were trying to spread across the media in the West. And also with torture. Oh, one thing with regards to democracy, given that the Shah wanted the country to be completely democratic, but then he saw that the country might not be ready for it. What he was doing, he was focusing on culture and education, so that so that maybe we could build the foundations for the democracy that Iran will become at the time of his son, when his son become the king. With regards to torture, there's so many lies about Muhammad Reza Shah doing torture. Muhammad Reza Shah was obsessed with ending any physical torture. What he said is that psychological torture maybe, and he was basically, but he said physical torture. He was obsessed with trying with getting rid of it completely. Now, did SAVAK do certain things that I don't know? Maybe certain, maybe, but the Shah himself was basically challenging Western, research. Like he was like, come to Iran, look in, like, go investigate the prisons, go investigate anything you want. Where do you need access to? He was basically obsessed with saying to the world that we do not torture here. He was very much against physical torture, even though he was okay with like psychological torture, but he was very, very aggressively against physical torture, and he wanted to make sure there's no physical torture in Iran. So those are, like, I'm not going to go to the third part because I think I spoke for too long right now, but I also have a list for attacks on princes of Pahlavi, the third Pahlavi, which maybe at another time I will go through that list and my defense for each. And again, I'm going to turn all of this into an article at some point.